Okay, welcome to Powerhouse Bakery, Divas and Dudes. I'm so happy to have you here in my house. And this is such an exciting time. You know, throughout the year, the holiday season is kind of a fun opportunity to maybe bring in some favorite old recipes and maybe even some new recipes. And oh my pie season is upon us. So at Powerhouse Bakery every year we have a few things that we try to make traditions. Fresh Bread Friday, you know, on Fridays, but just a few or couple of months out of the year, really, we celebrate with pies. So today what I want to do is kind of segue from our important tools of the trade into how do we now make a fantastic pie. And of course, we got to start with the crust. So in the next, I think it's about 4 weeks, we're going to go through different types of pies. So today I want to kind of give you the details around what makes, I think, a really good pie crust and some of the tricks of the trade. So we'll start with, you know, one recipe, but just know over the next several weeks, we're going to be doing several different kinds of pie crusts. And so here at Powerhouse Bakery, it's really important that we keep everything gluten-free. But, you know, you don't have to make them gluten-free, of course. But what's nice is the techniques that we learn here, making them gluten-free, allows for you to have a variety of options for your guests. So, you know, when we think of pie, we have, of course, the flour. And here, we're going to use different types of flours. What's the other most important part of the flour or the pie base? Well, it would be the fat. So we have the fat and the flour, and some of the pie crusts are going to be savory. What do I mean by that? Not sweet. So if you're going to make a quiche or you're going to make a meat pie, or sometimes even with your holiday sweet pies, you don't really want the crust to be too sweet. So sometimes we will add sugar and sometimes we will not, and almost always salt. So, you know, flour, fat, sugar, and salt make the pie. And then you think, well, gosh, that can't be too hard. There's a few ingredients, but there's so many techniques around making a good pie crust. So what do we consider important in a pie crust? You always hear, well, how do you make one flaky? So how do we get a flaky pie crust? Any suggestions?
Well, it's got to be like, you're not going to use butter, right?
We are going to use. So, you know, whenever we talk about healthy, never do I say we have to take out things that we like, right? We always look at our best foods list and we go from good to great. And to have a good pie crust, we know there's going to have to be some fat in it. So even at Powerhouse Bakery, we're going to use a fat. Here I've got butter on my table. We are going to use butter today, but throughout the weeks you're going to see me using variety. So say we're going to want to do a vegan pie crust, then our fat can vary. We can use palm shortening, or we can use a vegan butter, which we've definitely done, and I'm going to show you. So whenever we think of these variations, I mean, what's nice is even for our keto friends, now we can use a variety of flour too. So the traditional wheat base, so enriched white flour, is of course made from wheat, which is why we wouldn't use it here. But we can use almond, we could use sorghum, we could use millet, a combination of any of those, as well as maybe even quinoa and brown rice. So what's nice is when we start looking at the base, we are going to have lots of choices. And then to make it flaky, it's going to be the relationship of the flour and the fat. So when we think of the fats, we can use a non-animal product. We could even use a sugar that is a non-nutritive sweetener. So you know me, I'm not a big fan of non-nutritive sweeteners. But if we're making something that's going to work for our friends and families and it has to be sugar-free, we could certainly use some options here. And then more or less of salt. Now, I have definitely seen some expert bakers not even add salt, but instead have a fat that has salt in it, so salted butter, right? But I still really believe that adding salt into the recipe helps, because when we have a little bit more salt, we can really enjoy less of the sugar. So remember, that balance on the palate is something that I think is really important. So let's go back to those qualities that we're talking about. And if we think of flaky, we know we have a mouth feel that we're looking for. We want it to be slightly crunchy, right? When you bite into your lemon pie or your chocolate pie, you want to have a delicate crisp. And it's hard to describe, but we know it when we find it. And so that flakiness is going to be the relationship between the flour and the fat. So what we want to have happen is the little granules of fat, we don't want it to melt. We want it to hold in place. And so if this is the fat layer, we want flour to be all around it, so encasing the fat. These are the flour granules. So what's important is it holds those little granules of fat, and you'll see that even larger granules the better. So there's that sweet spot between little pebbles of the fat in the flour versus some bigger and smaller pieces. So really important that they interact in a certain way to get that flakiness. So the trick is, how do we get that flour and the fat to blend together without it getting melty? Our hands are warm, so if we start working with the dough, that's going to cause melting. And so now the pieces of the fat and the flour get so small that you don't get that nice little crunch factor. So that's the trick of the flakiness, is we want the butter particles, let me dry that off a little bit, the butter particles need to be a little bigger. So I always use the term pea size. So let's say pea size fat particles. So I promise you, now I'm challenged. I am going to bring my dough cutter, and the way my mom used to do it, would not be with a food processor. So nowadays we are kind of lucky because we get something that does the work for us, where it's not using our hands, it's using the cold mixer to do a quick interaction between the flour and the fat. And so that's what we're always, trying to get just right, is that size. So in a typical wheat flour base, it's really simple because it's just going to be the flour and the fat that are interacting. So if you don't have anybody that has a gluten issue or even a dairy issue, your job is the easiest. So what we're going to do in the next few weeks here at Powerhouse is we're going to make them even more challenging, so the tools that you use will even make it easier. So working with a cold ingredient list is really important, and thinking about what flavor profile you want to go for. So if it's going to be savory, meaning you don't want it to be too sweet, then just use a very small amount of salt, or maybe none at all. And then, of course, if you use your butter, you might want to have it a butter that has salted component, or it could be unsalted butter. And then you have, the ultimate choice of adding in a sweet saltiness or not. But it won't affect the cooking process. So that's the good news. The salt doesn't affect the cooking style. It doesn't have anything to do with the flakiness, as well as the sugar. So the sugar and the salt do not affect that really good mouth feel. What else do we look for in a crust? Well, we want it to be pretty. And so as we look at our other tools of the trade, whatever you decide to cook your pie in, you could get a really fancy, beautiful one. But I do like having a fairly good size ridge around my pie plate so that we can work the edges. And so I'm so proud of my sons. I think most of you know I have two sons. One's 25 and one just turned 27. And they both are famous for their apple pies. And it makes me so happy that they make the crust from scratch. And I don't even think they have a food processor. Maybe one of them does. But anyway, they love to do some dough art. And so again, when you're using a base crust that is wheat or enriched flour and fat, it's so easy. The trick is, though, you don't want to handle it too much because the warmth of your hands will, of course, decrease or melt those fat granules into the flour, and that's where you start getting trouble with the texture. Now, if you're doing some design work, it's not as important because you're going to maybe cut out some pretty leaves or some design that you're going to put on the pie. That you can work a little more and it won't affect it, but it's the base that's so important. So your pie pan is really important. I also have in here, it says it on the front, can you read it? Not very well, beans. So I just use regular old beans to put into my crust. So there's a couple of stages that we prepare the crust. And of course, once we roll it out, we're going to flatten it and then we're going to put it into the pie pan, and then we want to make sure that it cooks evenly. So there's a couple of steps that we're going to do with that crust. So once we get the dough created, and then we are going to make sure that we prepare the pie pan. So when it goes in, we're going to take a cold disc from the refrigerator. So after we prepare it today, I'll show you how you make it into little discs, and that you can keep in the refrigerator for several weeks. Bring it out and make your pie crust when you're ready. So it's nice at this stage to plan ahead, and you can freeze them, but I think it's better to refrigerate once you have the dough discs prepared. So I'll show you that today, and then we'll go from there. But the next stage is to make sure you've got all the tools for baking the crust. And so whether you use any kind of bean, dried, of course, or you could use some special baking pearls. So these are just fancy. They're not any different. That's why, kind of the old-time cooks just go to beans, because this is something that you typically will have around in your house, right? Because we all eat lots of beans throughout the year, and they work really well. The other thing that you'll want is a piece of foil. And so assembling our crust, we're going to put the crust in the pan, and then we're going to line it really thoroughly with foil, and then we put the black beans in, or any kind of bean, and that way we par bake the shell. So you par bake it, and that way you have the crispiness already established. Now there are certainly some pies where you might not want to par bake, but I really like to do this because it gives it an extra crispness so that your filling doesn't melt into it. Another trick is that once you get it into your pan, all baked and ready to go, chill it. Or in our case, sometimes we even freeze it. And then take it right out and put your filling in that's cold. And then if you want to bake a meringue on the top or finish baking the product, you can pop it in. That way you're really focusing on that cold element to keep the particles of the butter really as cold as possible and keeping those chunks in place. Okay, so par baking using the beans or the baking pearls, and then of course make sure that you have some foil. Now some folks do use parchment, which you can, absolutely. Just make sure it's the type that can be oven safe. Wax paper, no. Wax paper can't go into the oven, right? So the other tools of the trade that we want to make sure we have is some tea towels. So I brought these, and truth be told, I actually use like these are napkins, but I like the size. So again, we're gonna scoop up the dough and into my little tea towel and wrap it, and this is what I'm gonna help chill it down and hold it in the fridge. So it's just a little, this is linen. I just like the feel of the linen, so I never really use these as napkins because it's too much work to clean them all the time. So I just use them for when I'm baking. But I really like these because I can get just the right size. I can put it into my towel, squeeze it, form it into the disc, and then it's ready to go in the fridge, and then I can pull it right out, and then these get washed. So really helpful. And for the last tool of the trade to show you is this really special marble rolling board. my mom has passed away now, but when I was a young girl, we used to cook together all the time. And so this was a gift she gave me, is this marble board to roll out on, and then the matching rolling pin. So it's really special. I love it. Does it have to be marble? No, but the idea that makes it nice, and I'm going to pass this around so you can feel it, it's really good weight and it's very cold. So when I first started doing pies, I was following, don't hate me for this, Martha Stewart. She was, awesome in her years, and so she is the first one that really taught me how to do pies, alongside my mom, of course. And so having the marble was really special. And my mom never used marble. That was, gift to me because I watched Martha Stewart. She always used a wooden one. Anybody used wooden? Yes. And she even had a sock that would go over it. And the sock would be a very soft, pliable muslin or another kind of fabric that was stretchy. And we would flour the rolling pin and use that to roll out the dough. And then the sock would come off and you'd wash it and you'd use a fresh one. But and I love the feel of wood too. Lots of restaurants that I've worked in, I started out in an Italian restaurant when I was in college, and I learned so much from this first generation Italian. And he would make pie crusts, and he would oil this with olive oil and then put the flour, and you kind of got its own little patina going on. We don't do that here, and I don't do it at home either, but I'm sure that some chefs believe that that's another trick of the trade. Here at Powerhouse, we have one more. Did I hide it? Oh, yes, I did hide it. Here at Powerhouse, when we do our cinnamon rolls, we do use this one. And so notice that it has a little different shape, but it's really nice to work because these handles, they're kind of for looks. I mean, they're pretty weak. I wouldn't want to push down with these. And then when I discovered this one, I really love it because when you roll, you can just work the dough, and so it's got a little thicker center piece, a little thinner at the edges, and it's just fabulous. So when we do the cinnamon rolls, we'll have this one to get to play with. So you'll find that whether it's marble or it's some kind of unusual shape without handles, you'll find your favorite. And this is something that I hope you can, share with the other cooks in your family, and definitely get the kids involved so that they can have fun with it, because nothing I think is more special around the holidays than creating kind of the traditions. And, I know you all have your favorite traditions, and so maybe adding a new one to an old one might be to do some fun food preparation. And again, nowadays we have more and more people that have food intolerances or preferences. And so in the next few weeks, I want to get to show you how to do some different pie crusts that represent different food allergies. So just kind of in a summary, what we're going to go through is today will be a classic gluten-free crust. And this is one that I've used for a long time. So I'm going to put up the recipe. So definitely write this down. And I'll try to put into the eBlast this recipe as well, along with maybe a filling, just to make it fun. But this is our exclusive Powerhouse Bakery gluten-free pie crust. So I'm going to call it Classic Crust. And of course, gluten-free. And I'm going to tell you how we do our flour blend. So it's going to be 1.5 cups of all-purpose gluten-free flour. And in this little blend, we do equal parts of sorghum, brown rice, and sweet white rice. So I'll have flour available if you want to purchase flour. I think it'd be really fun. But again, you can use your all-purpose. I recommend you get an organic wheat flour if you're going to go that route, so you can feel like you've got a really high-quality ingredient. Remember, in our best foods list, we always talk about how do you go from good to great. And if you don't have a wheat allergy, then go ahead and spend a little extra on an organic, unbleached wheat flour, and you will love the results. So any kind of flour here. Now, if you're using a wheat flour, you don't need this next ingredient. But in a gluten-free, we need 3/4 teaspoon of xanthan gum. And this is to help really have that gluten component, so it adds those little strings of connection that we won't get when we're using sorghum, brown rice, and white rice. Now you're going to see as I go through in the weeks, we're going to do one that is paleo, and it doesn't require any xanthan gum. Because remember, when I opened Powerhouse, I didn't know anything about xanthan. I'd never heard of it, and we did most of my first recipes with nothing like that. All the muffins and the granolas, and even bread we've done without xanthan. So just know it's not required, and I can help you do a modification if you're interested in doing something that's gluten-free that you don't want xanthan. Sometimes people just don't want that ingredient. I don't really think there's anything wrong with it, but again, some people have a sensitivity. So there you have it. And then we go to the leavening agents. So 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. And here's our salt. So 1/2 teaspoon of salt. People often ask, can we use Himalayan? Of course you can. Sometimes people ask about kosher. Just be careful with kosher because it is a larger granule. So you might go with a little less. Just be familiar with the salt you're using if you do a fancy one, because the most difference happens in the size of the granule. And then here we go, 6 tablespoons of butter. And in this one I do use unsalted. And then we do, here's a little variation to it. I love this recipe. 1/2 cup of sour cream and ice water. So I asked my team to keep all of this in the fridge just until we were ready to do our steps. And so I've got the salt and the xanthan gum in these little cups. And I've got a little bit of sugar. Let's see, actually, no sugar. Good, so just the salt, xanthan, and baking powder. So in my little containers. And now I am ready to cut my butter. So here's our flour. So again, I added this little variation, but I think the sour cream is a really nice addition. So it's not obligatory. Again, because this is gluten-free and it's kind of our classic special crust, I've added in this element, and it just gives it an extra little, I don't know, I guess, complement of flavors. As I've gone through and looked at different pie recipes on YouTube and the internet, I do see other ingredients kind of pop in and out. Sometimes I see vinegar, and I think it's following in line with trying to get a little bit of a sour, sweet, because again, our palate wants sweet, salt, maybe sour, and then the texture. So all those components are going into what makes the perfect pie crust. So I've seen vinegar, and here's a crazy one, which I promise I'm going to learn about the whys and hows, is vodka. Right? Anybody ever put vodka in their pie crust? I would have tried it, but I just didn't have any vodka. But I think it'd be really fun to learn about and investigate. So that stay tuned for, because I think it'll be really fun. So Mary, if you can ask for the sour cream, because we're keeping it cold until I was ready to use it. Yeah, please. Thank you. I forgot to have her bring it out. Okay, so now I want to get started. So again, I'm keeping all the ingredients cold, and that's why I asked Mary to get just the last bit of the ingredients. Oh, and let's see. Yeah. The water I'm going to also keep cold. So I'm just going to get it from my cooler here. And, you know, sometimes, especially when I'm doing these at home, I even put an ice cube in. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Perfect.
Which one's the same then?
This one. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to make myself a little room. And I'm going to cut the butter so you can kind of see the texture of it. because I already had it cut, and see, she did it in these beautiful little cubes. But I might have even made the chunks bigger. So I want you to kind of see the way that it comes out, and it's of course not super critical, but just a plain cube. And right as I'm ready to begin cutting, I want it to be on my cold marble. And gosh, when I was really following Martha Stewart closely, I would actually chill my blade and my cutting board and everything. Probably don't have to be that specific, but it is really fun. So it's very hard butter. So I love that. It's just going to be perfect for mixing in. Because remember, the goal is to not mix too much and to make sure that I get the right pea-size pieces before I go too far into blending it and mixing it. So let me show you this. Okay, so that looks excellent. All right, so I've got all my ingredients I'm going to add into my mixer. So I've got the flour, and we'll just pretend I just pulled it out of the freezer. And I've got my leavening agent and salt. Xanthan gum. I'm going to give that a twirl first. I did watch one chef that said, you don't even have to pre-mix, just put everything in all at once. And I just couldn't bring myself to do that. I always like to get each stage mixed nicely so you don't have any risk of getting a bite of salt. Now this is the stage where I could put in sugar if I wanted to. And when we do, there's a paleo recipe that I'm going to show you that has coconut sugar, and it goes with the fat and the sugar and the flour, and it's just delicious. And again, paleo is, you know, the focus of no added sugar that is not organic. So coconut sugar counts, and so it's a really good one. Okay, here we go. I'm going to put in my little cubes. She cut them so beautifully, and I'll start with those. Oops, sorry, got to get that guy out of there. Huh. Beautiful. So before I put in the sour cream, I want to get the butter in there well to start doing little pea-sized granules. Yes, it's looking perfect. I'm going to see if I can stop it and show you what the little granules look like. Right now, I'd say it looks more like sand. So I've got little pea-sized granules in there. And it's nice and cold to the touch, so it's beautiful. All right, so now the next step is to add in that sour cream. Actually, I'm just gonna take this lid off. So again, the traditional crusts don't usually have sour cream, but because the gluten-free texture is one that you always have to really work with, I thought it would be so fun to experiment with this, and it's just turned out to be lovely. And it's so versatile that it works well as a par-baked crust, and then also one that you could go ahead and bake the whole thing at once, like for an apple pie. All right. So as this is going along, now I'm going to do, you want to start with just a little bit of ice water at a teaspoon or so at a time. You probably are going to need around a tablespoon or two. But that's, again, where the science goes in. See, look how beautiful it is, right? So if I was going to really work with this dough and make a lot of lattice structure, I would probably add a little more liquid. But just look at this texture, and it's already there. It's starting to stick together beautifully, and I haven't even added much water. My recipe, let me see if I can give you an exact amount of water, because again, I kind of go by look, so I want to give you something more concrete to start with. It says probably a teaspoon or two. So instead of a tablespoon, because again, we're adding the sour cream, go ahead and just start with a teaspoon or two, because it's looking so good right now. So I'm going to put all that back in, and I'm working quickly because I still want it to stay cold, because right now it's got all those beautiful little textures. Okay, so I'm going to add a teaspoon or two of water. So I want you to see it on the side view. Pretty quick, it's going to kind of pull together, and you're going to see the ball start. I'm probably at 2 teaspoons now because I just did that little dab. I'm going to stop. Yes. Perfect. Yeah, so see how it starts to really come together and you can see those nice chunks. So it looks beautiful. So if I pull it out, it's already ready to stick together and it's all those beautiful little pieces. So now it's so key. I don't want to touch it too much. I don't want to overwork it. The faster, oops, thank you. The faster, that's okay. We can leave it there. Thank you so much. The faster we work with it, the better. So I am going to get it right into the ball. So the next stage is to get it into my little muslin. Because remember, we want to chill it before we start to work it with the dough and the board. So my rolling pins are going to be in the freezer right now, and they're going to stay nice and cold. I'm going to roll these babies up. So this is where the little napkin-sized tea towel comes in handy. So I'm not touching it too much. I'm just wrapping it in the towel, and I'm going to press it together. And this will go right into the refrigerator, and it'll be ready. So now for purposes of getting to show you the next step, I'm going to just open it so you can kind of see what it's going to look like even without having to be chilled. And the nice thing is, because that sour cream is added, it's really forgiving. It's really nice. It's already beautiful. So if you didn't have the time to let it sit, using the sour cream option just helps so much because it's a beautiful ball. So now I'm going to put it into a nice round shape. And I'm going to get ready to cut it in half. So each of these should make a whole pie crust. I could do the bottom is half and then a lattice structure as the top. So this is going to go into the fridge so I can work with one half at a time. I'm going to wrap it around. And at my home, I've got a paleo one, I've got a keto, and of course the classic. And I just keep them in these little dough balls. Okay, so now I've got my actual one that we're going to work with. I'm going to flatten it out just a little bit. One thing I'm missing here is a little bit of flour to put on my base. So I'm going to have my beautiful helper Mary bring me some flour. Thank you so much. Lindsay did such a good job starting my ingredient list. So, but see how nice? It's really hooking together. There's no crumbly pieces. And that's saying something for a dough that is gluten-free. And like the way my mom used to do it, that little sock would stay on here and she would actually douse that in some flour and then put it on. And that would be her only time of really adding it. So I'll be excited to hear what system you guys use. But it's a nice little shape, and when the board is cold, it rolls right out. And even if I don't have flour, it's really sticking together nicely. Perfect. Thank you so much. No, just a little tiny bit. And next time I'll be able to show it to you from top down too, and we'll get this beautiful look. So here I'm going to add flour to the wood board, and not a lot of it sticks, but that's okay. We don't really want to add too much flour to the recipe anyway. So I'm just rubbing it across. And then I'm going to do up and down, turn it a quarter turn, up and down, turn it a quarter turn. And notice that there's little cracks that are starting, and that's okay. With my hand, I'm just going to push it together. So I just kind of mend it together. It doesn't really become an issue because I'm going to try to have even pressure all around. And so it's going to be a little harder for me to pick up, but I'm going to see if I can lift my whole plate. So see, it's moving around. It's not sticking at all to my my board. If I pick it up, it'll be crumbly. And so that's okay. It's so forgiving. We're just going to squeeze it back together. And I'm going to try my other one so you can kind of see how this one works. And it's not sticking. I'm going to keep it from not sticking by adding a little bit of flour to the base. And it is looking beautiful. So my sons, when they make their crusts, they use just a plain organic. They don't use gluten-free. And so they get to do lots of really fun, elaborate designs. It's a little tougher to do the lattice structure with a gluten-free crust because it doesn't stick together as well. And again, that's why I've learned with the variations on the recipes, you can get a lot better size and thickness without it crumbling. So this recipe, we could even use vegan butter, and we could use vegan sour cream, and it'll be perfect option for dairy-free. Yeah, this is coming out beautiful. I'm just lifting it right off my marble. And in a second here, I'm going to put it into our pie pan. There's a couple different systems for lifting it off your board and putting it into your pie pan. One of them is rolling it right onto your roller. If you've seen that, we're going to do that system. But my mom used to just fold it in half. Oops, stuck it. She would just fold it in half and it would just fit right in there like magic. So I always loved how she could do that. And really with any crust, you can sort of do the patchwork if you need to, and it works out just fine because it will stick together once it's in your pie pan. All right, so let's bring it into the pie pan. See, it's kind of breaking now, which no big deal. That would always worry my mom if it stuck, because she wanted it to be perfect, even if you couldn't see it, which I love. All right, so make sure it does not stick. There we go. I'm kind of doing a little round motion too, and it helps to get it even. Another trick we can do is having the pie pan close by. You want to kind of measure and see how wide we have to get. So here I've got my pie pan. I'm going to see how close I am. I've got about 1/2 inch around the base. So if I'm laying it down about 1/2 inch around the base, I want to get enough up here so that it can go all the way to the top. And there we go. So you're going to shoot for probably about a 1/4 inch of thickness. There we go. Lifting it up. It is cracking terribly. So I'm going to use my 2 pieces, I think, because I really want to see if I can get the sides all the way up the top. Because I want to show you how to do the little crimping around the edges too. And I just happened to pick an extra large pie pan. So I'm going to pull this guy together, and we'll definitely get enough for the whole top. So I got my other half. I'm just squeezing it together. And even if you start to do this and put it in the freezer for about 30 seconds, maybe even a minute, it'll help to keep it tight. Each direction. 1/4 turn, each direction, and 1/4 turn. Little bit of flour. There, beautiful. I wish we could have a top down so you could kind of see how pretty the flour is. And so even this guy, where he's breaking, I'm still just pinching it together. And when I get enough right on the top, I'm going to show you how we do a little squeeze around each edge. And it turns out beautiful. Even if it's not perfect, it's still really pretty. Because the good news is when you get your filling in, you're not going to see the inside. So I don't want it to discourage you if your crust doesn't come out from your board to your pan easily, because you can still make the really pretty little edge. So it is perfect either way. So on this one, I've got nice round edges. There we go. So notice that I'm not pressing here on the edge, the handles. I'm just kind of letting the weight of the marble, which is why this guy is also really nice. Gives you a little more workspace. Flipping it around. If we do a berry pie or an apple pie, that's the one where you might want to even cook your apples. That way your crust and your apples always are done together. I think that's often a problem with the berry pies or fruit, because you want the apples to be soft, but you don't want the crust to be overdone. So the way to fix that is to kind of marry them together when they're at a perfect stage. So we usually cook the apples for about 10 minutes on the stove, and we par-bake the crust. Yeah, this one's looking great. I love this roller. I'll be excited to hear from you guys and hear what kind of roller you use, because the trick of getting this beautiful is really to work with it quickly, but also be able to get it even around the edges. So each time I pull some in, I'm tucking in the corners so that it's nice and neat all the way around. The other trick of the trade is to add a little bit of water as we're doing the whole batch. See how pretty that's looking? So it's so close. I can add my little drops of water if I need to do any mending. And with this one I didn't. The first one was a little bit drier, but this one's working out great. So just a little edge of water, and don't forget to put your flour on the bottom of it so it doesn't stick to the pan or my board here. That is beautiful. It's just about ready to come up. So don't be discouraged if it's hard to do at first, because it will be just fine when you get your filling in there. It's not worth giving up and buying one from the freezer case. It is not worth it. So the tricks are a little bit of water, a little bit of flour. If you needed to, you could probably even put a little bit of fat in if you had a crack that was misbehaving. So far this one's doing pretty good, but what's tough is without the doughs being really cold, it's a little tougher to work with. All right, I think that is looking gorgeous. And this would be a great opportunity for me to be able to do some cuts and shapes, and I could make some leaves. I could do all kinds of fun creations. I'm going to cut this in half. I'm going to use it for the half of my base. That's really sticking right there. There we go. So see, it comes off pretty easily. I know it keeps wanting to break. And the different styles of doing those little crimpings are so fun too, because I'm going to use my thumb and my index finger and the thumb of the other hand and do this cute little shape. This is where your grandkids could come in and be a part of doing their thumbprint. I love it. I love it. So check this out. I'm just going to piece this together, because again, gluten-free is a little tougher than a regular one, with the wheat flour. The xanthan gum does help a ton, and so being able to work with your dough and not worry if it doesn't come out perfect, because you're going to have a great flavor, and you get to do all of your pretty decorating right at the top. So now I'm going to show you how to put the beans in there. So I've got all the crimping done, no holes. So even if I have to put together a piece to do a patchwork, see there's a little hole right there, I'm going to do a little patch. So as long as I don't have any holes in the crust, it will bake beautifully. So little pieces in there so that the liquid that I'm going to fill the crust with doesn't seep into those holes. That's where you have problems where it will burn when it's at the base. All right, so I'm going to do my last crimping. Got a little extra dough I'm going to just add on to the sides. You can do different techniques on this too. There's even a little tool if you wanted to get fancy. But the trick is to make sure you got all of your areas covered. And then try to tidy up the edge too, so that when it cuts, it doesn't crumble too badly. So notice here I've got little bumps. Try to keep it as smooth as you can. So I'll go through and tighten up all those edges. The last thing we want to do is put some holes in the crust on the top so that if it does bubble up, it'll give you a chance for the air to escape. And this is where our foil is going to come in handy. So get one about the size of the diameter of your pie. That's about right. It's okay if the foil doesn't touch the top. What's key is that it tucks into the corners of the pie crust. So all the way around there, I want it to come up against the glass. So I'm giving it a little press. Nice and smooth at the bottom. And then I put my beans right in there to kind of hold it stable. So it's just enough of a weight to make sure all those little spaces come up snug against the pie pan. So that works really well. Just snug it right in. If you're par baking it and you don't want your edges to brown, I would recommend you start with them open and then take the foil and add it at the end, because if your foil goes on when your dough is fresh, you won't be able to keep all your pretty shapes. Yeah, so I think that's definitely my challenge. Was I had a larger pan than the one we typically use on this recipe. So when I started to roll it, it made it a little too thin. But that is going to cook off beautifully. So I'm just having that little bit of foil out. Now when I'm ready, I can fold it over and protect the edges of the pan, of the pie pan, so that it protects the crust halfway through the cooking. So you give it long enough so that it can fold right over, and you will have a perfect pie crust. So just as a quick summary, the main things that I want to share with you is variety of flours. So if you needed it to be grain-free, we could use nut flours. If we needed it to be, of course, gluten-free, we have a variety of flours. I do have people that have allergies to corn. Fortunately, corn's not in this recipe, but if you wanted to add corn, it's a great way to add a little extra texture to the whole profile. And so then we'll show you different ways to add flavors. And of course, adding the paleo aspect means that everything has to be organic. And then if we want to go with low carb, we're going to take out the grains and add in the nut flours and have so much fun with that variety. So stay tuned, because we're going to bake these off and start filling them, and then we'll also get to see what we do with a meringue and the trick around making sure the meringue does not seep liquid. If you've ever had a chocolate pie and it has moisture underneath, I found a secret for that. So thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you next time on Oh My Pie.